Hey, what's going on? Doc Danny here with the PT Entrepreneur Podcast, and today we're talking about two books, well, I guess three books, but two primary books that can fit either style of entrepreneur that we typically see to help you really round yourself out. Now, I'm talking about this because just yesterday we had our winter workshop, which we do 2 virtual workshops a year for our mastermind members. And when we do that, I have a chance to dive into people's businesses with them. All of our coaches are in there. We have a number of different things we do, both sort of bigger group and then small group work. And one of the things that I had a chance to do was talk to some younger business owners. Some of them are partners as well. There's a couple different groups that had business partners. And what's interesting when we see business partners is usually there's a combination of someone that's more operationally heavy and somebody that's more sort of like forward facing. That's on the partnership side. But when you have an individual entrepreneur that starts a business, you typically bias towards one of these as well. And it's really important to know which one you are, because not only do you want to know that and kind of lean into your superpowers, but you need to also learn how to soften those edges you have that are going to be problematic for you as well. Okay, this is not something that anybody ever talked to me about early on. I wish they would have, because the thing is, with my wife and I working together, we were opposing skill sets in a positive way. We didn't know. We kind of lucked into that. And when we look at successful entrepreneurs, they can be either of these variations that I'm going to talk about, but you kind of need to know which one you are so you can work on the things you're going to have a challenge with. So there's a book called Rocket Fuel. This is an author named Gino Wickman. He wrote another book called the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS, which is it's a system that a lot of businesses use for meeting cadences and verbiage and for planning, right? And it's really good. It's kind of complex, and oftentimes you need to have a facilitator come in, which can be very expensive. I think having some sort of system like that is really good. We have created a variation. It isn't quite as intense. It's far more simplified that we use with our own mastermind members and our own clients. But Gino Wickman does a great job, and he wrote a book called Rocket Fuel that highlights these two sort of personality types within businesses. One is called a visionary and one is an integrator. So a visionary is somebody that's more sort of, sales marketing driven. They like ideation and creation of ideas and being face to face with people. They tend to be a bit more extroverted. They tend to get excited around people and need to be around people and can get people excited about a vision. That's why they're called visionaries. But they're typically very unorganized. They have a hard time of following through on things. They are not detail oriented. They lose track of things. It's their kryptonite. Versus an integrator. An integrator is fantastic at all of those things. They're very organized, detail oriented. They track everything. They like spreadsheets. They like organization. What they tend to struggle with oftentimes is forward facing things. So they're not the one that's going to want to go to do a marketing event. They're not the one that wants to give a presentation. They're not the one that wants to, represent the business in a business entrepreneur group of some sort, right? That's not their strong suit. They're not going to get up and give an inspiring speech to their staff, right? Not usually. They prefer not to, let me put it that way. So, you kind of have to ask yourself, which of these two are you? And I've worked with enough people now that they can pick it out pretty quickly just based on the way in which they interact with other people. And what I've found is that owning a business, it's going to, in a positive manner, highlight your superpowers in that business. So if you're very, visionary and you can get people excited and you're good at it in public, you can drive a lot of business to your clinic, superpower. Where you're going to struggle is with scale. It's going to be with you trying to systemize things and hire people and follow up with people and having communication at a high level. If someone's an integrator, well, they're going to do great on the organization side of things, but they're going to struggle at driving business. They're going to struggle at the marketing side of things. They're going to struggle at, team motivation and things of that nature. So you can't really change who you are. Like, you just naturally are who you are. If anybody has kids, nature nurture is a real thing. there's a natural set point for everybody. Yes, you can obviously learn things and improve and whatever you want, but just deep down, everybody kind of naturally has a set point that they are comfortable with. And if you as an entrepreneur understand which one you are, a visionary or an integrator, now you have a chance to say, all right, well, I know this is going to be beneficial in many ways, but how can I also learn to at least be proficient in these other skills that are going to be required of you so that you're able to actually be as effective as possible for your team, right? For me, I struggled a lot with, organization, follow through, communication. It's still an area that's not a huge strength of mine, and an area that I've gotten much, much better at. And it's because I've had to learn how to actually do those things. These are skills that I've had to learn. Same thing, if you're more introverted or you're more operationally, driven as an integrator is, then, you're going to have to work on things like public presence and charisma and your ability to engage with your team and making sure that you are able to be forward facing in the business, because you may have to. So there's 2 books that I want to recommend, one for each of these. And I think this is something that, when I think about books, there's like this, I don't know, it's almost like people have like a race to see who can read the most, which is fine if you just are trying to learn as much as you can. But sometimes what we need is not necessarily just broad learning, but targeted learning, right? We don't need broad information. We need targeted information. And we need to apply that. And maybe it's that you need to read this book, this one book, multiple times and really apply the things from that book. Instead of moving on to another one, instead of saying, okay, I've read this, now what? It's, well, now let's apply it. And then let's reread it. And let's make sure that we're continuing to improve these skills. So if you are more of an integrator, you like spreadsheets and organization, and you like details, and you like, everything to have its place, and you like the operational side of the business, well, the book that I have for you is a classic. It's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Now, this is a strange title for a book, very strange title for a book. And yet, in many ways, one of the more impactful books that anybody could read that struggles with, being a bit more forward-facing. And it's not that you can't do it. It's just a skill that maybe doesn't come as naturally to you, or no one's ever taught you. Now, the interesting thing about this book is it was written like in the 20s or something. Like it's like 100 years old, damn near. And the concepts of it, the topics, they just have really aged well. In an age where we have far more technology and things have changed, the human-human connection hasn't changed much. I remember I read this book while I was going through out processing from the Army. If anybody's ever been in the military, you do in processing and out processing. It's basically this, it's almost like a scavenger hunt that they give you this checklist of stuff that you have to do. But then some offices are only open on certain days, and you have to go to certain offices before you can go to other offices. So what happens is you basically end up waiting a lot. And they give you like a week or 2 to do this. And so you always bring a book with you and just wait. Just bring a book and wait. You're gonna be waiting a lot. So I read this book during my out processing when I was at Fort Benning, right before we left to go to Atlanta and open our clinic. And this is not necessarily an area that I struggle in. I'm pretty good at connecting with people early on, and at least the early stage of that. For the follow through and curating and maintaining relationships, I wasn't nearly as good at. And this book was helpful really in both those domains. Very easy to learn. If there's a book that I would recommend anybody who's a bit more, operationally minded, that maybe struggles a little bit with people face to face and building and making connections and curating those relationships and being somebody that people want to see win, because they actually like you as a person and they enjoy being around you. This is probably the most slam dunk book that you could possibly read. It's very easy to read. It's very actionable. There's exercises you can do in it. So I would highly, highly recommend it to anybody that's more of an integrator, right? So if you fall into the integrator category and that sounds more like you, then How to Win Friends and Influence People, don't just give it a read. Read it, start practicing the things that they talk about, and then read it again. And think of it as mastery of an area that's going to help your business, help you in your business in probably the most profound way. Because what I see with people that are founders, that are more integrators, is they struggle more at the beginning. They struggle more at the start phase because they're not as comfortable going out and getting business. They're not as comfortable doing workshops or local networking. They're not as maybe attractive. Their personality isn't as attractive to people to potentially work there. They're not going to like pull people in with their charisma and they gravitate towards them. But they may be a fantastic boss because they're very consistent and they have, standards and they follow through on things. So, but to get to that stage, you have to build the skill set of being able to push yourself into kind of a bit more of a visionary role early on. You have to do both. Now, let's talk about the visionaries because it's probably actually for founders, this is the more common category. Visionaries tend to be, founders more often because they're more comfortable going out on their own. They're more comfortable trying to drive business early on. They frankly don't plan as much. So they maybe don't think of the downside as much. So that allows them to go out and, get started without maybe fully understanding the repercussions of if this is not successful, for better or worse. That's just sort of the way it is. But what you're going to struggle with is consistency, is follow through, is organization. And there's one book that I would recommend for you that I think is a very, very effective, simple book. And this is called The Checklist Manifesto. The Checklist Manifesto is a book that was written by a surgeon who's a Harvard Medical School professor as well. And the concept of the book is basically, looking at where we use checklists in different professions. For instance, if someone's flying a plane, there's a checklist of what they're going to do before they take off. There's a checklist of what they're going to do when they land. There's a checklist of what they do in air. There's a checklist of what they do if something goes wrong. And it reduces accidents substantially, like in a significant way. They looked at infection rates in hospitals, and by following checklists, even people that are seasoned providers, if they follow a checklist, they reduce infection rates dramatically in comparison to those hospitals that do not use checklists. So checklists are these things that are essentially systems and processes. They force you to think about things in an organized manner. And if you are more visionary biased, you're going to really struggle with this. In fact, me even talking about this book makes you bored. And you're like, I don't want to read a book about checklists and processes and systems. That doesn't sound cool. I'm sure you'd rather read a book about, Richard Branson's entrepreneurial story and all these crazy shit that he did. Like, yeah, that sounds far more entertaining. But what is going to get you to the next step of the skills that you need to acquire? Because that's what it's all about. And this is something that, yesterday I had some conversations with people in our mastermind about the stages they're at and the things that they need to work on. Because if you really think of the momentum you gain, it's just the amount of effort you put in times the right things, right? So if you're putting effort, multiplied by accuracy of the decisions of what to work on, you're going to gain a lot of momentum. And you're going to look back in a year or 2 years, 3 years, and you're going to be like, holy crap, look how far I've come. If you do not understand what skills you need to acquire and how those layer on in the building phase to the next parts of the business that you're going to move on to, well, you're going to really struggle. And here's what I see with visionaries. Visionaries tend to grow faster early on, but they also tend to have more turnover when they hire people. They have more turnover because when you hire somebody, you have to be consistent with that person. You have to give them feedback. They have to know what they're allowed to do, not to do, what processes and systems to follow, if they want to take time off, or when you're onboarding them, and all kinds of things. Just consistency of being an employer of people. And most visionaries are really bad at that. And they think, oh, I can just I'm going to hire an admin. And that's not just how it works, man. Like, you can't just hire an admin to do all of these things for you. You're still the boss. Like, you're still in charge, and they're going to look for you for leadership and for feedback and consistency. And if you struggle with those things, you end up irritating people and they end up leaving. And as great as you are at getting, buy-in and people in the door and storytelling and whatever else, you're going to drop the ball on creating a place that's consistent for people to work. And that is like having a really bad foundation that you build a house on top of. So you've got to improve these skills. And understanding the simple concept of systemizing things, processes, having checklists for things that need to be done within the business, a checklist for your evaluations. Here's what we do. Here's how we meet people. This is the duration of time we work with them. This is the EMR that we use. This is how we document. This is how we send a homework email. This is how we check them out. This is when we do follow-ups, always schedule a visit from a visit. Like whatever it is, a checklist in place that your team can then go and look at as well and review so that they can make sure that they're doing the things that they need to do. But that comes from your brain. You got to get it out of your brain and you got to put it somewhere where it's visible to other people as well. So Checklist Manifesto, that's the book for you. And if you read it, again, it's not just read it, check the box. It's read it, study it, take notes, apply it, come back, reread sections of it. This is how we create long-term, knowledge gains in the appropriate ways. And I'm sorry this isn't as cool as just listening to this podcast and just like, I got all the information I need. You can listen to this and now I have some, recommendations for anybody that listens to it. You're going to fall into one or two of these, one of the two, whichever one you bias towards. Get that book. Maybe you've already read these. Cool. Pick them back up. Are you applying the things that are taught in these books? Because when we look at mastery of topics, it doesn't come from superficial. I read this thing one time. I listened to this one podcast. It's application of the things that people are talking about that are going to give you an advantage, period. That's it. And it's a little bit more work, but you're already doing a big chunk of it. All you have to do is continually try to follow up and make sure you're improving those skills. Now, once you feel like you've got those mastered, cool, we can work on other things. We can move on to other things. But these are foundational, two very foundational things. And I even see this at, bigger scale size businesses where it's still creating problems for people, even though they've been able to kind of scale past multiple folks. And it's still things that we need to address and work on. So I hope this helps you. I hope this helps you with accuracy of something that you can work on. A lot of this stuff at the beginning of the year, concepts, right? Where it's like, I'm going to start the new year with X, Y, and Z going on. It's like, okay, you just start now. My daughter told me she was going to start working on something at the beginning of the year. And I challenged her. I said, why don't you just start right now? What's the difference? You get a 3-week head start on the beginning of the year. Why does the first of the year have anything to do with that? I understand. It's a turnover date. I get that the year changes, but why not start now? And she didn't have a good reason why. Like most people don't. So if you listen to this, you could say, hey, this is my New Year's resolution or whatever, or you could just start reading these books now while you have some downtime around the holidays, start applying the concepts and start really trying to improve the areas where you're weak, because that is where you're going to really develop well-roundedness as an entrepreneur, which is going to help you get to the next stage of business. Think of it like these skills you have to learn in a video game, these skills you have to acquire and build before you can go and then go and fight these other bosses at harder levels. Like if you don't acquire those, it's like Zelda. Like my son was playing Zelda on the Switch. It's like you can't go and fight this boss until you get this suit of armor that only comes from this thing, right? So as soon as you acquire that skill set, now you're more likely to be able to actually be successful in these harder levels. Same thing in business. These are just foundational. Make sure you're working on the areas that are not natural to you, because that is where true growth comes from.